the fuss is about. It's so freaking cold and it's crowded outside. The same song's been playing the 900th time. I fucking hate Christmas and I'll tell you why.
Welcome to Silly Whales. This is a mental health podcast where we discuss things that are a little bit on the, the sensitive side, like suicidal thoughts, depression, all that stuff. This podcast is for everyone, but it might not be for you. And that is okay. That is very much okay. Me and Joe here.
Hello.
I thought you guys. Yeah, there we go. There we go. There we go.
I thought you were going to give me slightly more layup. I apologize.
It was a really poor underhit pass to you, but hey, you made it work. We do presents and we deep dive into certain topics and certain, trends maybe. Today, you're joining us in the lead up to Christmas. And all that stuff. All that fucking bollocks. And we are doing a deep dive into the winter blues, Christmas depression, alternatively known as seasonal affective disorder. Now, allow me to read the NHS for you here. Seasonal affective disorder, S.A.D, is a type of depression that comes and goes in a seasonal pattern. S.A.D is sometimes known as winter depression because symptoms are usually more apparent and more severe during the winter. Symptoms of S.A.D include persistent low mood, a loss of pleasure of interest in normal everyday activities, irritability, feelings of despair, guilt and worthlessness. I'm going to skip all the way down to decreased sex drive. Now, the exact cause of S.A.D is not fully understood, but it's often linked to reduced exposure to sunlight during the shorter autumn and winter days. The main theory is that a lack of sunlight might stop part of the brain called the hypothalamus working properly, which may affect the production of melatonin, production of serotonin, and the body's internal clock, also known as your circadian rhythm. So that is seasonal affective disorder. I think we've mentioned in a previous episode, was titled S.A.D actually, that we both deal with it, but in different times of the year. Exactly. So yes. I have it during the summer, and Joe has it more commonly during the winter. Now, focusing on Christmas exactly, we wanted to do this primarily because not everyone wants to feel merry and not everyone wants to be all jolly during Christmas. Christmas is hard. Personally, I've not enjoyed Christmas for about 5 or 6 years now. Joe loves Christmas. Joe, can I ask what your Christmas is like now? Now you're moved away from home, you're expanding your life. What is Christmas like for Joe?
Okay. On the one hand, I will say it's much like it was every other year because I go back home for Christmas. In terms of the specific experience I have compared to, having lived when I lived at home and so on and went back there. I lived there and then had Christmas there. I think now is probably for me a more, it's a bigger experience because I get to actually go see my family in a way that I don't normally have that interaction. So it's somewhat, I think, depends on, a little bit of the heart wants what it doesn't have all the time. I fucked up the phrase, but you know what I mean? I don't, I don't want to be around my family all the time. So it's nice to have good impetus and explanations and reasons to go back. If that's what you wanted. I don't know how much you want more.
No, I just wanted to get a glimpse into someone who, because you have S.A.D during the winter time, right?
Yeah, I do, yeah.
So I want to get an understanding, because I don't have it, of how it coincides with Christmas.
Oh, sure. It's quite so obviously this year is probably the weirdest because I'm currently living my best life. But but the general, but the as a general rule, it's quite a dichotomy or a confliction within itself, like a contradiction within itself. I spend a lot of my early December, and I mean, to be fair, with things like the Jingle Jam, like I mentioned previously, December actually ends up being a lot more well-rounded. I think December probably ends up being the best month in that respect. I tend to experience a lot of sad in November, for example, and I might even in October. And I really, really tend to experience it in January and February. It tends to be the worst in those months. Although probably maybe similar to November, but I guess with January and February, I've already had the fun times, and now it's kind of a deluge afterwards. Kind of hangover, if you will, of that experience. So to a certain extent, it was, I think December nowadays compared to before has always been a sort of weird, not medium. It's not quite that, but kind of like a rampant up and down in terms of me kind of being excited for the event, for having other things happening around the same time that are boosting my mood, but also experiencing probably some of the darkest days of the year, and easily finding that my life just feels very it's like a weird form of claustrophobia, which I don't have, but like a weird form of like social claustrophobia that will occur. But then a sudden, very emergent like engagement and like a social engagement outside of that through things like the Jingle Jam and then my family.
Yeah. Like, so I'm someone who doesn't really enjoy Christmas, and I'll get into that later on in the episode. But I've noticed that I'm really happy. If it's -1 outside and pissing out with rain, I'm having so much fun. It's the best day ever. I'm like a dog in a puddle, it's great. So it's really funny because for me, the downside and the depressive mood and all those things come into play pretty much the minute I realize Christmas is about to begin. So if I were to live near Harrods, September onwards, I'll want to kill everybody. However, lucky I don't. I live near Tesco, and they're normally a good indicator of when it's approaching Christmas time. Because late November, you see like, there's a little Christmas tree for sale, woo! And that is when it hits me. So I remember when it hit me this year, it was like November 27th or whatever. And I was in Tesco, and I was like, that's a Christmas tree. It's not out to actually sell yet, but that's a Christmas tree. I looked down at my watch, saw the date, and I was like, shit. And I started to feel down on the cycle ride home. And then the next day, I heard a Christmas song on the radio. I was like, with Christmas approaching, and then I started to tumble from there. That Christmas spirit, everyone wanted to be happy. And then midway through the week before, so early December, I'm not going to see you again, so Merry Christmas. Fuck! It's happening. And I just get the anxious feeling surrounding it. And it's terrible. I really hate it. I really hate that I don't like Christmas. But again, I'm going to leave the more personal feelings aside to later on in the episode. I'm going to discuss rampant consumerism. I think we both have a bit to say on this.
Yeah.
I'll go short but briefly. I remember the pressures that my mum had, especially because I used to get like an Argos catalogue for those international. It's pretty much just a place where you buy anything, like gifts and beds. You can buy whatever. I used to pick it up, circle all the things I wanted. I don't think I got anything I ever circled. and it wasn't even to do with like, oh, mom couldn't afford it, whatever. That probably factored into it. But the things that she would end up getting me were probably more expensive things I actually asked for. Case in point, I think I wanted a Nintendo DS, and I got a DS and a Wii. So I was like, cool. But I circled like so much of a random shit that if I got the Hot Wheels set I circled, if I got the Pokemon light up lamp I circled, I would have been happy. I wouldn't even care about the Wii. I probably would have cried for it later on. But hey, and it's like, there's now pressure as I got older and money became more of a financial restriction of just like, realistically, you're not going to get what you asked for. And by the time I hit like 17, 18, I wasn't really getting anything anyway. I wasn't really asking for anything at that point. Now, having worked with kids, I've seen them really upset and emotional over Christmas because they're not connected with their family properly during Christmas, or a common one, they're not getting what they want. And their parents have told them early that we're not going to be able to get what you want. And it's really sad, the pressure that there is on parents and families in order to provide, happiness, if that makes sense. That's me done.
It is, I mean, I'm working in retail and I have done for a while now. So I actually have a sort of insider view of what it's like to be the vendor in terms of the nature of Christmas. It is insane. It is by far the most advertised and most commercial holiday possibly in the world. I don't know enough about different I don't know enough about the economy of the world to like or like different countries to to say that, but I think probably across the world internationally, Christmas is huge. It's not every country, and it's not every culture like at all. We'll get into that later, but it's certainly in the UK and certainly in the US. I imagine the same. It's an insane holiday. The biggest, for example, I'm thinking now about like holidays. I don't know what your favorite like quote unquote holiday is. One of my favorites is in the UK. It would be I don't know why I'm forgetting the name. Bonfire Night, Guy Fawkes Night. Not because I like fireworks that much, but mostly just because I have really good fond memories around it. It's where some of my favorite memories of my granddad come from. Which, considering all of the memories I have, it's like kind of, where it's a bit more middling. Like, it's a very big one. And for me as well, there's something quite special about how it doesn't get a lot of attention. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of one of those weird things where I actually enjoy it more as a result, that it feels very personal rather than very commercial, even though obviously there's loads of fireworks sold and things like that. To your point, actually, about the pressure on parents, I'm pretty sure that my family getting a Wii or my cousin's family getting a Wii was, because we got it in the same year, one of the sets, either me and my brother or my two cousins, got a Wii because the other parents were going to buy the Wii for their children. Like, that was the only reason. It wasn't going to happen otherwise. I think maybe we both asked, but it wasn't going to happen until that kind of became true. Again, I don't remember which way around it was. And it just goes to show, like, when we're talking about like the relationship between families and children and parents with things like the rampant consumerism and consumerist nature of Christmas, you start to realize how so much of it tends in this direction of selling you. I mean, think about like the Christmas music you hear, the fact that you see Christmas stuff so early. This is selling Christmas to you. It's not just selling the specific products themselves. It's selling the idea of Christmas. It's selling the notion that it's something to enjoy and be excited about. I mean, I do enjoy Christmas, but I can tell you that there have been years of my life, and I won't go too specific on it, but there are definitely Christmases I've had where the hype just didn't live up to the experience whatsoever. Like, it did not. And it's funny that I can say that in the way that we might talk about like a game being hyped for, or about any sort of like thing that's being clearly advertised and sold, having that experience. I've also heard loads of people talk about how how essentially there's a lot of kind of investment, and the monetary investment involved in Christmas is sort of leading you to believe that it's worth it. It's kind of there's a sort of illusion that surrounds things, where if you feel like it's kind of like the gambler's fallacy. If you put money into something, you feel like it must have some value, or it must some worth. So it's something to consider, because I don't know how many people engage in like very, for example, me and you don't buy gifts for each other, right? This is a thing that we've never really like talked about specifically. We just never did it. And me and Kessus don't. I think I bought him something last year, but I really bought something for both of us, like a board game. So we don't buy stuff for each other, and this is normal. And it has never affected our relationship in any negative way whatsoever. There has never been a moment with me and Kessus, or with me and you, that we've ever had an experience where we have felt left out, or felt like I wasn't always aware that you didn't like Christmas, but I wasn't ever feeling like somehow me not getting a present from you, or me not giving you a present, was somehow this really like tangibly like problematic thing or whatever. So I definitely like feel that we should be a bit more questioning of that. But also, like, I wonder if people actually engaged with a Christmas where they didn't buy things for each other, or kept it very little. The one thing I'll say about the way my parents did things is that they very much had like an upper limit that we knew about as children. Like, this is the amount you get. You cannot go higher than that. Which I think is why the Wii wasn't a thing that we were expecting, because I think the Wii was bought almost on top of what we asked for, or like as part of what we asked for, you know. So a little bit got taken out of me and my brother's fund or whatever you can think of it as. And we were aware of that, so it gave us a good sense of like, yeah, well, you're going to get something because we want you to be excited or whatever. And they found it exciting, or at least my mum certainly did. I don't really know how my dad feels about Christmas, but my mum certainly has a very positive experience herself, and I think has always tried to push that forward to us. But there's always been this kind of recognition of money isn't really everything. And the fact that Christmas has become so much about that, the fact that I've listened to, I cannot tell you how many times I've listened to the same Christmas song over and over again. Not just that, I can't tell you how many times I've heard like 7 different covers of the same Christmas song multiple times over. Like, there are so many bad covers. I'm sorry. Christmas songs genuinely like need to. I really wish there was a little bit of songs, not Christmas songs, right now at work. Like, Jesus Christ. Why were you born? No, I mean, could you,
how dare you?
A very important thing I want to add just at the end of this is the fact that like Christmas being sold the way it is something I think would happen regardless of any relationship to its religious sort of like roots or whatever, which again, there's a whole load of things around all of that. I mean, yeah, I won't go into it, but you know, historically, like what Christmas is and when it became the way it did, the fact that we have there's so many ideas we have about Christmas, from like what Santa looks like to Christmas cards, to the idea of like, and all of the relationship specifics, like even meat, the way that we like, even the way that we engage with like having a big turkey, for example. Why is that? Well, it's because of a tradition. It's because of like what was cheap at a certain time and things like that historically. When you kind of look into it, you start to realize how much of this is kind of always has and always will continue to be a thing that some person made up in order to try and sell shit. Like KFC in Japan, for those who don't know, KFC is like the big traditional thing in Japan with Christmas because of advertising campaigns there. And you might ask, oh, that seems stupid, but there's no reason why that's any less stupid than some of the things we have here.
Yeah,
and it's just important to recognize that, because money goes beyond any kind of like sentimental values we might hold. And it's important to recognize that when talking about Christmas, that it's not socially like a purely sentimental experience, and nothing I'm expecting to be a purely sentimental experience, but it's like very highly commercial, and we should recognize this when other people maybe don't like Christmas. We don't take that as a purely defensive action, like offensive action against ourselves, that they've said something like that, because there's lots to not like about Christmas, and it should be understood that way.
Like the average UK adult spends £300 buying Christmas presents, and the total spending on Christmas gifts was 20.1 billion. That was in 2022. So, like, there is definitely a capitalistic pressure when it comes to how we view it all. Because I remember back in the day when, come January, you like see kids at school, you trade, not really trade, you'd be like, I got this for Christmas, I got this for Christmas. Mm-hmm. And I definitely remember kids being like, oh, your family's poor, we didn't get you anything, and that pressure of it all as well. It's a really sad state of affairs, really, as there's a lot of people who are going to struggle during Christmas time. And I really, that in itself is tough. And
oh, yeah, I mean, not even to mention, just to be clear, like how many people are going through tough times around December and so on, that feel the need to have to give up all of this money. Until recently, I wasn't sure if I was going to get the job I wanted. And I wasn't sure about how I was going to deal with my old job as a result. I really didn't want to go back. So there was a lot of kind of tension within myself around, well, do I spend money? Because I might not have money after this in the way that I hope for. Like, that's kind of an important recognition that, like, when times are tough, people still feel the need to do it. And it is such an investment.
If you want proof that times are tough, like, I read 20.1 billion, and I read that as a massive amount. It's actually gone down. So it was 26.9 billion. but we are in a literal cost of living crisis at the moment in which these things will all impact. And I'm going to post the website I got it from. They're a sustainable packaging group. So they like measured how many Christmas packages like will cover London. Pretty much loads of game consoles will cover London. We need to look at the sustainability of our Christmas package. So with all of this, Joe mentioned Christmas songs, and I'm someone who vehemently hates Christmas songs. I was going to do a massive rant on it, and I realized that Joe did it, and it summarized how I felt entirely. So all I'm going to say is this. If you play Christmas songs around me, I'm going to give you a dirty look. When I was working in Calais, there was a limit in the kitchen that we worked at for 5 Christmas songs. And that meant that people had to really use them sparingly. My favorite Christmas song is Don't Shoot Me Santa by The Killers, because it's just a great song. I hate everything else. When Mariah Carey sings, yes, she has a great voice and all, but I don't care.
I really don't like Mariah Carey that much in her songs. Jesus,
you're gonna get slaughtered eventually.
Is that controversial? I don't know. I like Christmas songs in general, but that one I don't like.
Yeah. There's a pressure to be merry. So when you don't like a Christmas song, people look at you and go, but it's Christmas. I don't give a fuck. Okay. There's a societal expectation as well as a pressure to be merry and be happy. And when you're dealing with, be it seasonal depression, seasonal affective disorder, seasonal depression, if you're dealing with anxiety during the time frame, for whatever reason, the idea that you have to feel a certain way during a certain time of year is very archaic and very just behind. And the pressure to be happy and put a smile on your face makes the situation that you're currently in possibly, well, to be honest, worse. And that is to be said about masking and the general idea that you have to mask our feelings a lot during the time of year known as Christmas and the holidays. Now, we're 2 neurodivergent people, so masking has varying difficulties and varying rates of success. I am particularly not very good at masking. I have moments where it's really good, but 9 times out of 10 I'm failing. My feelings are very clear to show. However, I remember during Christmas, I had to very much on like my best. I am happy to be alive. This is great. Life is great. Power Rangers is great. It is, but I don't need to express that it's great. Hey, now I have to. And there's a load of connotation and reasons behind it. But one of the things that I want to really touch on is think about your friends in your life who, you know that they have maybe a mental health condition, maybe they've reached out to you about how they're feeling, be it depression, be it anxiety, be whatever it is that's going on in their lives, and double check on them on Christmas time, because it can be a miserable, miserable time, even if you're surrounded by your entire family. And did you want to say anything about the pressure to be merry? Because I was going to move straight into societal expectations.
Yeah, I think I don't know if this is best to talk about now or if it's best to talk about later, but I did kind of want to bring up the what the pressure to be merry is for. Or so, for example, so obviously I was saying earlier about about what Christmas means to people, and I think it's worth recognizing that that a lot of people don't celebrate Christmas, and I can imagine for them it must be such a bizarre experience to be around all of this like happiness propaganda, if you will, while not having any kind of relationship with it. You know, it's whether it's because of religious reasons or whether it's because like you have a traumatic experience in relationship to Christmas and it's something you avoid. It's like, imagine, like Ramadan or Diwali getting the kind of exposure that Christmas does in this country. And just imagine how, like, for example, with Diwali or with Ramadan, how many people would just be like, what's Ramadan? Like, what's the point of this? Like, why is this like being pushed in my face? Like, it's one of those weird things where, and of course, I also should point out how this also ends up being the same with not just neurodivergent people who don't like Christmas, but just people in general who don't like Christmas, where you really feel this like advent of this wave of pressure that doesn't really feel genuine, probably. Because obviously, since I mentioned it is this very consumerist thing, there isn't really this like necessarily this combined notion about what the point of Christmas is or why it's even happening, or that it should mean something to you. Because if from a religious point of view, okay, well, that doesn't, I personally don't have that relationship with it, so that's not going to affect me. And then the only reason I happen to enjoy it is because I've been sort of taught to by my family, and the fact that my family has such a good experience with it, and then they made it their own, and there's sort of this and this is a sort of like atheist experience of it. But I recognize incredibly consumerist experience when you actually when you think about being a part of it. So if you suddenly don't like that, then suddenly I can imagine it's a bit like being in a club or a bar when you don't drink, where it's this odd experience of like the atmosphere around you being so different to the internal one. And just in general, that internal experience versus the external, I think is something that people need to consider and look at. It's hard to imagine what someone else's feelings are of something like this, especially when it's traditional. But I do want people to kind of like maybe take a step back and think, okay, well, what if I just didn't have a family to go to that I really loved and wanted to engage with? Or what if, as we're about to talk about, what if I met my family and it's awful? And it's not worth it's not worth that experience. So you don't want that experience at all.
So, this is Ryan, or as Cupid knows me and christened me, the Mosh Pit Daddy. My tip for surviving Christmas with depression is make sure that you fill it with moments that are important to you and that you enjoy. Whether that's, if you're seeing family, take time out to go and watch the show you like, sit on your phone, text your friends. If you're alone, then just make sure you fill it with things that you like. Merry Christmas. Thank you to both of you guys for an amazing year of podcasting.
So now as we move on to societal expectations here, Joe punched it in his face. The idea that we've meant to spend Christmas with our loved ones is great on paper. The reality is that families are very complex things. Loved ones are very complex things. Case in point, you might go and see a family and then you see your uncle and then you see his really weird girlfriend who's like the same age as you or some shit. Mm-hmm. Or you just have a terrible relationship with your family for whatever reason. I know, I do have permission to talk about this, but I'm not going to go into detail about it. I have a few friends who have recently come out as being part of the LGBTQ plus community. Their families aren't taking it well. So their Christmas is going to be really awkward and really difficult. And it's like, we need to get past this, to quote their dad. We need to just move past this and enjoy Christmas. And it's like, well, my sexuality isn't something we move past. It's a part of me. So it's there. And it's like the societal expectation to put on a front so that pressure to be merry is debilitating in its own sense. But also the amount of pressure that there is, because it starts young. It starts really young. It gets you going young. You have to, if you're hosting, then you have to be in your best behavior. That's pressure. If you're an adult hosting, then you have to, one, make sure the kids are on their best behavior. So you're shouting at them more, mostly for no reason. Then you have to make sure the food is prepared properly because you don't want everyone to say you're a bad cook. And then you have to make sure that the Queen's speech is going to be on at a certain time. Because if it's not on, oh my goodness, Uncle George is going to throw a remote at somebody. And then you have to make sure that everything around you is clean and tidy and ready. It is constant. And then that, as well as the idea of how we deal with the interpersonal relationships as well. The societal expectation is Christmas is meant to be a time of happiness and a time of joy and spreading the cheer and everything positive. Underneath that is the reality. And the reality is that for those things to even remotely be possible, people have to work, which means people have to pretty much make sacrifices and come to compromises over situations where in any time of the year, they wouldn't need to, and they'll be able to walk away. Anyway,
I was just sort of imagining, and I'm kind of sad that we. Oh, well, I'm sorry. I should be clear. I'm sorry. I'm sad that I don't actually have like a person who has given me an anecdote like this in a way, which is what happens, for example, as a child when you have two parents that are divorced. Around Christmas.
I know this now.
Yeah,
not because I'm divorced and I have kids. I just have friends who are divorced and I've been through the whole thing. It's tough because you effectively both want your kid for Christmas.
mm-hmm.
And if you have a good relationship with your partner, then they'll be able to be like, yeah, well, they can spend like the first half of Christmas with us and the second half of Christmas with you. Or you end up like losing it in a court battle pretty much. So it can go any way. It depends on the relationship that everyone has.
It can already be kind of set in stone before you get to it. Yeah,
like
true.
the kid has a say, but in reality, depending on how young they are, like they don't really ever say because oh, Billy said he'll spend it with me. When?
Yeah, and again, that's huge pressure on the kid. That's huge pressure on the child, right? Like. And obviously, I initially thought of it as being the child, but what if you're the parent? Like to be the parent in the situation where you want to spend time with your child, and you are having to like deal with that kind of like conflict constantly, and obviously the prevention of this is to like, oh, don't get divorced is like, okay, well, so you're gonna have a horrible family, like you're gonna have a horrible Christmas with someone you don't want to be around, like So like, there's no, and this essentially will always occur when that situation arises, unfortunately, and that's just
it's very tough.
Yeah, that seems really tough. Like, obviously, I'm so lucky in that respect, and obviously that allows me to enjoy Christmas even more in that respect, like, or enjoy it in a more, I think, for more what it's meant to be, or the idea of it, or so. I say idea of it, but that has obviously changed a lot. I'm just thinking about like some of the expectations in general of people. You were talking about masking. Like I became incredibly good at masking to the point where it became a complex, and I essentially was always masking. And it meant that I just didn't engage with that I didn't engage with feelings properly, and so on. If I don't know how I would be. I should be clear, masking is incredibly tiring. It's incredibly like draining and stressful to do because you're always worried about being found out. So for people who actually are constantly having to do this, it's true, like regardless of like any of the other things mentioned, I think it might end up being one of the worst experiences you could possibly have for a period of time, where you're stuck with other people, forced to act in a way that you don't feel constantly, to the point that it will cause you stress on many, many different levels. And then you have to do that every year knowingly and with the expression that it's fine, because again, that feeling of self-sacrifice, I think that self-sacrificial feeling is almost what allows us to keep doing it and push each other to do it. We were chatting before the podcast about like how many people probably feel all of the things we're feeling, or at least some of them, and are never going to say that, to their family, or never going to say that to certain people in the wider world, because you're really worried that you are actually part of a very, very minor group of people. But I really do think it's much bigger than that. Or at the very least, I think that of that rather large group, I think that there is probably some people who have said it and get a lot of backlash from it. Get a lot of backlash saying, well, no, it's a nice thing or whatever. Like, there's no understanding there's no understanding there to say like, hey, look, it's people can feel like people can not have a positive experience the way you do with this thing, even if it's like the message of it is so positive. Again, refer back to other holidays. The big one for me, as an example, I hate Valentine's Day, and I think a lot of people don't like Valentine's Day. I think that's much more common, at least, for people not to. whether it's because of the societal expectations that you must be in a relationship, and the feeling that even if you're in a relationship, that no matter what's going on, you have to, you don't really love each other unless you do it. I mean, apart from like the sort of messaging in terms of, the specific ideas of Christmas versus the specific ideas of Valentine's Day, what is the difference between those two holidays as far as the expression, as far as that like pressure happening? Like if Valentine's Day was not just month long, because obviously like within February you'll have a lot of it, but was like, halfway into January or like most of January all the way up to February, like from New Year's Day onwards, you just had huge amounts of advertising pressure. We had Valentine's Day songs. We had like, we even had like a whole process of, I don't know, having like a peach tree in your house or some shit. I don't know. I'm coming up with crap. Like,
Yeah.
To represent Valentine's Day. Like, can you imagine like how bonkers that would be? Or at least how many of us would suddenly go, what the fuck? Like, why do I have to do all of this for Valentine's Day? This doesn't make any sense. I don't like Valentine's Day for blah, blah, blah. And don't recognize that that's because you have come to that conclusion on your own. And I'm sure lots of people do like Valentine's Day, don't get me wrong. But I also think that a lot of the people that like it also feel really bad when they don't have a good Valentine's Day or aren't in a relationship with someone at the time and feel like, some people are mad. Some people get into relationships have fucking Valentine's Day. You know what I mean? Like with someone. Like it's absurd. But again, that social expectation is so clear. It's so clear. That pressure is so clear to me. And I didn't think about Christmas that way until we kind of talked about it more. And I realized, oh yeah, of course. And obviously I've had examples in the past of other people who, for different reasons, don't celebrate Christmas and never have, or they have had a traumatic experience related to Christmas, which has meant that that time of year is a horrible time of year, and it's actively like a problem, that reminds them of something very, very sad, versus just simply not liking it for personal reasons, which again, I don't really discredit like one over the other, but one is much more tragic in a way than the other. But so I again, as part of that kind of desire to share and sort of research and learn empathy, I do think people should recognize that certain other versions of this, or if you like look at other holidays and do what Christmas does and add it to it, just how kind of maddening it all is,
Yeah. Like, I don't like Christmas. Well, listen, I used to really be excited for Christmas. It's actually the death of my grandmother sparked it, the whole decline of it. Because I remember she came to the door once and she was like, "Merry Christmas, and I hope you live to see many, many more." And I think in my head, canonically speaking, that was the last Christmas I ever had of her. It might not have been actually, but there was a whole tradition where she would, because we didn't live that far away from each other, where she would walk down the road and she'll come over for Christmas. She'll spend the night or two. So it was always that. And I remember bringing her food up in a plate, giving it to her every Christmas. And the minute that was no longer there to happen, Christmas itself didn't feel enjoyable anymore. We'll still cook. We'll still be like, yay, like this and that. But like the whole purpose of it, in my opinion, died. And I've never got it back. And it's when I tell people this, first thing they do is, well, what you need to do is, I don't need to do anything. Shut the fuck up. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need to start anything. I don't need to do anything. I'm pretty much as fine as it's going to be. Just understand that when you like run up to me with a Christmas cracker, be like, let's get you all nice and merry. Hey man, like, come on. You don't need to like cut all that shit out, because I've been here before. I'm a professional. This is what I do.
I'm a professional. I was just gonna add to that. I do
we'll end
think
on this.
Yeah. I just as a general motif and notion that we should continue with. Everything in life is better when you opt into it. And especially things like this. I opt into Christmas when it comes around. That's at least the feeling I have. Like I voluntarily go, I want to engage with this. If I, and I can imagine, I can imagine a scenario in which I maybe don't have Christmas the same way I used to, whether I have my own family or whether I have it with friends or something like that. I can just imagine a world in which I spend Christmas very differently to how I have done. And if I do so and I'm opting into the experience, and let's say there was someone like you or whatever there, and I was saying like, hey, if you want to come along, if I went into that experience, or if I went into that going, hey, it's Christmas, come, do this, do that, and like forced them to do this thing that I am so desperately wanting to do, we clearly recognize in normal situations how weird that is. We recognize that that's not a way to be with people. But if I say to them, hey, look, like we're doing this thing, if you want to be involved, I know, like, whether I know anything about them or not, whether, I might have, if we never kind of did this podcast, and maybe if I'd never like talked to you about it more specifically, I might never have known some of the experiences you had and personally felt about this holiday in a way that I truly understand now. And I definitely could see a time where in the future I might have gone up to you and been like, hey, so I'm doing Christmas with Kessers and Demi this year and we're doing it here and all this other sort of stuff, and been like, hey, do you want to come here and like do this and that, and like made it this very like this big thing. And maybe you would have liked that, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying one way or the other. I'm not like trying to force the issue in any direction around like how you should or shouldn't feel, or how I should or shouldn't feel, or how I would or wouldn't have acted. But there is a clear difference in that, like, hey, if you wanted to, I'm giving you an opportunity to quote unquote engage in a way that you can choose to, and possibly you would prefer to, over what you might have as another option, or not even as another option, as another pressure from another source, and maybe that could essentially be an excuse for you not to engage with the one you don't like, and maybe this will be neutral. I don't know, but we have to recognize that opting in is a clear different attitude to pulling someone in and forcing them to act the way you want to.
And exactly that. And we're going to end on that. I think that's a nice way to end it. All of the nice messaging we had, we said it in the beginning of the show anyway. There's stuff in the description, probably slightly more than usual. Yeah. Happy holidays. Happy Hanukkah. Happy Kwanzaa, whatever it is you feel like you want to celebrate. And if you want to celebrate absolutely nothing, you can, please celebrate nothing. Mm-hmm. To celebrate you being here today. How about that? Guys, we're going to take 2 merry jolly steps to the rear and get out of here. We're in the winter wind. See ya.
Reform Crimbo.